Santa Claus origin story A Boy Called Christmas, released this year, delayed 1 year by the pandemic. But the timing couldn't be better for this moving meditation on grief during the holiday season. I'm Colleen Phelps. In this look behind the playlist, the soundtrack's composer Dario Marianelli tells us about creating the 3 different snow-covered worlds that are all part of the story. So A Boy Called Christmas, from what I could tell, was your first Christmas movie. Is that right?
I've got to think back, but I think yes. I can't remember other Christmases in my films. No, it's right. Yeah.
Creating a Christmas movie, is there an added pressure to make a so-called classic?
Oh God, I think you never really start with those kind of pressures on yourself if you can help it. It's always try to start small. It starts with a conversation with the director, throwing some ideas around, and if you start comparing or looking at what other people have done, it's a good recipe to get stuck very quickly because to start with, you're going to listen and watch finished things that have taken a lot of work to be put together, and you're just at the beginning of your climb. And sometimes it's a very tall mountain to climb when you're on a feature film, especially fantasy adventure. There's typically lots of notes to be written, so it can be quite overwhelming comparing yourself not having yet climbed the mountain to something that exists already. But I suppose there is some pressure that is always there. In my case, I don't know how it works with other people, but for me, is always the pressure to do something that I haven't done yet, and try to do it, as well as I can. So there's a kind of pressure I put on myself, and it's kind of measuring against what I've done myself before, rather than what other people have done.
This is a North Pole story, but it's not Rankin and Bass. And I expected elves, I expected snow, I expected some action scenes, but what I didn't expect and really caught me off guard was such a moving meditation on grief and the allowing oneself to feel grief. How did you balance sort of the darkness that's part of this movie with the usual holly jolly of a Christmas movie within the music?
I think in a film like this, there's typically quite a number of emotions that one has to write with music, and you're right. There is both within the outer frame of the film, which is in contemporary times, and then the throwback to the fairy tale story. There is a great loss happening. I suppose it's just a matter of not trying to overwhelm with sadness the sudden moments, and treat them with lightness, and with some hope, which after all is quite the underlying theme of the movie. It's talked about quite explicitly in that. So within the despair, there's always that glimmer of hope that is never you never lose sight of. And I think it's good to remember that fairy tales also have darkness and grief at the center. It's not, it used to be that way. Red Riding Hood is a really dark story, and a lot of those stories, from the Brothers Grimm, and they all have quite a dark center, and they're not afraid to take the darkness and to confront the darkness. I think we've done the same with this film, and there's a underlying message of hope that I think is quite resolved at the end, and there is a future beyond the end of the movie that we can try to imagine. That is, it's a nice one.
There's two distinct, outside of the framed story in London, there's two real distinct worlds of the Elfenheim and then Finland, where things are really bright and cheerful, and then sort of dark and desolate. Can you talk about delineating musically when there's so much similar? There's snow, there's cold in both worlds, but musically, how did you sort of create one versus the other? Because that's a big part of what tells the audience this is a happy place, this is not a happy place.
Well, the movie starts already with snow falling in the streets of London, and one of the famous red buses coming towards us, and the character that disembarked from the bus is the voice that accompanies us through the stories, the narrating story of the film, and we discover at the end that he's a little bit more as well. I think it was important for us to start from a point of wonder and magic already straight away, not differentiate so much modern contemporary England, it's London, from a mythical, Finland, or anyway, North Pole, that that is the stuff of fairy tales. The magic and the wonder come in straight away. I think as I was saying before, there are dark moments in the fairy tale, and they typically use the devices of dark music, ominous lines, ominous tunes, and some sonorities that are a little bit scary, not too much. And on the other hand, there was an interesting idea that came up quite early from the director, from Gil Kennan, to try to imagine a development in the music that might hint to how carols have evolved or how carols might have come about. And so there is more than a subtle hint there in the score, and eventually they become more and more resolved and more fleshed out. And so there was this intention that the journey would bring you closer and closer to a musical Christmas atmosphere.
Outside of grief and loss, a big theme in the movie is storytelling and the power of believing in stories. And composing is all about storytelling. It's creating that world and that story. How do you embrace storytelling as a musician?
Oh, that's a really big question, and I'm not even sure that I know how to answer that. I suppose part of it is an instinctive relation to the characters, and try to understand what makes them function in some way. But it's a very elusive, I think, for myself, it's a very elusive point, the point where notes, music connects to story and to character. It's very hard to put your finger on it, and it's not something that you can kind of design, at the table. Apart from anything else, you'd never know how your audience will listen, how your music will register. You do have, as you work, as a composer, you have the feedback coming from the director. At least you've got, one person reaction that you can use as a sounding board. But I think the truth is that instinct plays a really big part. But it's also true to say that instinct develops over the years. So my instinct now is not the instinct I had 20 years ago, and I'm sure I would have written a totally different score 20 years ago. It's somehow life experience ends up coloring your instincts and the musical decisions I take. So I'm sure part of having spent quite a few Christmases myself by now, and many of them with my children and my family, and they're all experiences that color the music that you hear around the Christmas tree, or the music that goes together with seeing presents being received by children. I'm sure there is some of that.
Escape from Elfenheim via the school, that whole scene. Can you talk about really in the orchestra and in the scoring, how you take an action scene like that and make it not scary? Even, with maybe instrument choices, versus, the escape scene that happens a few minutes later that really is very scary and very sad.
How do you do it musically? I think in this particular case, well, the escape is divided in several sections. So there's quite a scary moment with the troll trying to eat Nicholas. And that gives way to a more joyous moment when they are expelled from the prison. And then there is the proper escape. So there are lots of sections within those 10 minutes. And you're right, the end, it ends quite sadly, because then Nicholas leaves Helfhelm behind, and he's quite sad that he hasn't found his father. He doesn't know whether he will find him. He's found the town of the elves that he was looking for a long time, and he was hoping to find a joyous place, but in fact Elfhelm is in trouble at that moment. I think there's probably one simple device to maintain tension throughout an escape like that, without turning it into a really scary thing, is to keep some kind of rhythm ticking regularly, and from time to time let the orchestra swell and explode in some bright moments where it looks like Nicholas might get away. Maybe he's won that particular battle, and then it all goes back into another tense moment. But there are enough interruptions to not to let it become heavy, I think.
So you mentioned transforming the tidbits of Christmas carols, but what really is your favorite moment scored from this film?
Oh gosh, I hadn't even thought about that. I think the musical moment that I enjoyed most writing, the last one of the last takeoffs of Nicholas on the reindeer, when he goes together with the king and they go on that magical flight away from the King Palace. Nicholas has arrived with this bag full of toys. They're very simple toys, little spinning tops and things like that. And he shows the king what it means to give a little bit of joy. And they fly on the reindeer's back from one roof to another, and they go down chimneys. They put little toys besides sleeping children. And it's a glorious moment for me musically. There are a lot of strands of the music that come together in that particular piece. There's the happiness of flying on the back of a reindeer, just seeing the world, the snowy world from high up, and it looks so beautiful. It was the one moment where I finally felt I could use the sleigh bell. I had kind of held back for the whole score, but at that point I thought, okay, here the sleigh bells are coming out here, and then there are other bells. There are even church bells and glockenspiel, and there's a brightness and there's a shimmer that was really beautiful to try to put in the music, and reflect a little bit this sparkliness of what Nicholas might be feeling inside.
In less than a year, this is the second film score where I say film score, the second score where I've interviewed the composer and they used an authentic Scandinavian instrument. And for you, where does authenticity like that, like being literal with, like you said, you held back the sleigh bell until it felt like you really should use it. Where does authenticity and pulling in the real instrument or that sound that you expect play a role in scoring?
This particular film, there were a couple of places at the very beginning, a couple of thoughts that I had even before I started writing music. One was that I wanted to try to bring in some tunes, some Scandinavian tunes, and I started researching a little bit. And also, there's a really wonderful, amazing violinist called Pekka Kuusisto from Finland, who is a friend. I met him some time ago. We've become friends, and I've gone to his concerts. And as you probably know, he mixes classical music with some folk music, and he seemed a perfect person to bring some of that Scandinavian spirit into the film. So I asked him to collaborate with me, and I wrote a couple of tunes that I gave him to play, but also I borrowed some Scandinavian folk tunes from him, and I think there are probably 3 or 4 tucked in the music quite unobtrusively, but if you pay attention, there are a few moments where Pekka's violin is kind of whistling. It's very, very wistful. These folk tunes are very old, coming straight from Scandinavia, from Father Christmas land.
There are so many iconic Christmas film scores, just like there's so many iconic Christmas movies. Was there a substantial one that sort of sat in your mind as, maybe between Dmitri Tiomkin and like there's just between It's a Wonderful Life, Miracle on 34th Street? Was there a film that sat in your mind as, oh, that's the ultimate Christmas film score?
You got me there. I've on purpose. I stayed away from going looking for other scores when I was working on these, and I haven't yet. So I've got a vague memory right now of It's a Wonderful Life, which has definitely left an impression. But I suppose in the background there's always a certain amount of magical, wondrous music that one has heard. It becomes a little unspecific, I must say, when I'm writing my own music, and it's if anything, there's effort to forget it, if that's possible. So the answer is no. I can't single out one Christmassy score right now.
This project, the themes of the film and the approach toward grief seems very on the nose for right now, but I know the timeline for making a movie is so much longer than people expect. What was the timeline of this like for you? When did you start working on the project, and sort of how long did you have to create this score?
We record. So I need to think about it, because the movie really was ready to come out last screen, the Christmas before this one. And it was decided that because of the situation with the virus and the cinemas not really being open in any meaningful way, it was decided to delay 1 year the release. So in fact, I recorded the score in September, not this past September, but the year before. And I had already been working from March around. So it was about 6 months of work, from March to September, if I've counted right. Um, and the work had started partially quite early while the film was still being shot, because there was an idea that we tried to pursue, which then it kind of left its trace in the movie, but it didn't really work out. We wanted the elves to be singing carols, and so I did write actual carols, new carols for the elves to sing, and I arranged them. We did some recording sessions with a group of singers who tried to sing quite rowdy, half drunk elf singing, whatever that might be. And that was specifically for 2 or 3 places in the movie where we thought we might hear literally how carols were born, where carols come from. But it turned out it would eat into the storytelling time to the point that was becoming a distraction. So we kept following this idea in the score of carols somehow emerging from the journey of the music, but we took it away from the actual shooting. Nevertheless, these scenes were prepped and rehearsed and partially shot as well. So that was happening probably even earlier than March last year. That would have been a few months earlier, while Gil was prepping, in pre-production.
So thinking back pretty far then, you told me about the carols that were so much fun to include. What was the biggest challenge for scoring in this story?
I mean, every movie is challenging in its own way. The sheer amount of music on a film of this type is a challenge in its own right. And with the music that you end up throwing away, plus the couple of hours of music that actually end up in the film, you probably write the equivalent of a couple of two or three Mozart operas worth of music, in a few months. And they all need to be somehow mocked up for the director or the producers to hear. That's another huge amount of work if you are interested in the detail. And there are test previews in which the music has not been recorded yet with the real orchestra. You want your mock-ups to sound as beautiful as they can. Those are all normal challenges in a film of this size, but they are challenging, and time management becomes quite important. The various ideas that are at the basis of this score. So my desire to connect to Finnish music, to Scandinavian music, and also the desire to have carols somehow being present, at least in spirit, in the score. These are ideas that are so vague at the beginning when you start working, and you have to try to find ways to make them concrete. You've got to make them happen. I suppose that's the biggest challenge, to turn an idea that it's quite easy to explain in a couple of words into something that somehow registers with the viewer, even if not completely consciously, but to get to the point where I'm happy that I've actually done what I said I wanted to do. That journey is always quite difficult, because you're just following some very abstract idea, and the measure of how much you've succeeded, it's a little hard to get. You only get at the end when you see the finished thing.
Stepping away from the film for just a little bit here as we wrap up, I have a couple of Christmas music questions for you. A couple of years ago, there was an article that made the rounds about the opening of the song All I Want for Christmas Is You, explaining in the article why the opening sounds like Christmas. Music theory aside from that article, what does Christmas sound like to you musically?
Felt like carols. You know, there's a great simplicity in carols. That was this source of inspiration for a number of tunes in the film. There's a sparkle definitely, and that I hope it comes through in the orchestration of the music. But there's a shimmer, there's a sparkle that I don't know. It's lights on the tree or the this shiny star and bubbles hanging from the tree, and generally there's a lightness. There's a lightness that has to do with children mostly, and so there's something simple, and then there is something also quite warm and fuzzy, in the middle of your tummy when you think about family and the people that you love, and that's if it's possible to bundle that up in some kind of music, that's what I was trying to do.
You're not working, you're making Christmas cookies, or you're decorating your tree, or you're wrapping presents. What is on your playlist? What is your Christmas jam?
Oh gosh, if there is music playing, I've got to stop doing whatever I'm doing. I can't do anything. So there's no playlist. I either listen to music or I do something else. I find it very difficult to have background music. So there, non-answer, I'm afraid, but truth.
All right. Well, thank you so much for the time. I know
Right,
it's always hard to find time in a schedule in December in general, so I really appreciate it.
it's fine. It's fine. I'm worried because I haven't yet done.
You can stream A Boy Called Christmas on Netflix anytime, and you'll hear Dario Marianelli's music from the soundtrack on WUOL.